the stars of last year's Rare Spares 4 and Rotary Nationals was Tony Rigoli's Fiat 131. It made a big impression at the drags and a bigger one at the burnouts. Owned by Tony's son Dominic, it's a good example, along with this Fiat 124 Coupe of Adam Pavarani, of what you can do with cars that don't come from Japan. Powered by the original Fiat 2-litre with a 16-valve Lancia head from an Integrale rally car, it's controlled by a Microtech Digi-1 and breathed through a new Garrett T04 turbo running 16 pounds of boost. Italian parts aren't cheap. The Lancia head alone cost $4,500, but with 250 horsepower at the wheels, it's probably money well spent. After we mounted a camera directly over the rear wheel, Dominic just couldn't resist another burnout. But his enthusiasm led to a small overheating problem, reminding us of the origin of the name Fiat. Fix it again, Tony. Around the circuit, the handling showed no major vices, but a heavy right foot at the wrong time can easily lead to a grass-driving event. And the original Fiat brakes left no doubt they'd been working hard. The 131 is closely related to Adam's 124. Same computer, same Fiat 2-litre engine with Lancia head, but using the T03 turbo at 12 psi. Producing just over 200 horsepower at the wheels, the 124 is tuned more for drivability. Today's drive was virtually Adam's first run in the car since completion, so he had a fair bit of familiarisation to do.
Alright, okay.
The new springs and Coney shocks may need a little refinement. Before setting up a drag, we installed the reliable G-Tech timers in each car. As expected, the 131 had more pace and Adam was still getting used to the 124. He wasn't sure whether to concentrate on the bonnet lifting or Dominic crossing into his lane. The G-Tech recorded 13s for the 131. It has run 12.6 on slicks, but with a smaller turbo. With its new turbo, it should do even better. Properly sorted, the 124 shouldn't be too far away. Whenever conversation turns to Australia's fastest street rotaries, Maztec of Melbourne's RX3 is among the first mentioned.
Fastest pro street rotary in the world.
Maztec owner Anthony Rodriguez was even asked to demonstrate it for the crowd at the Melbourne Formula One Grand Prix. But to fully appreciate this car's ability, we visited the 32nd Australian Drag Racing Championships at Melbourne's Calder Park Raceway.
Ladies and gentlemen, 296.63.
It was here on December 13, 1997 that the RX3 ran its best quarter-mile time of 9.12 seconds at 148 miles per hour. That's with an all-steel body. No weight-saving fiberglass panels here. Anthony has a reputation for not letting many people peek under the bonnet of his car.
Oh no, Nico, get away! Go on, Nico!
But we managed to sneak a look on condition we didn't show the right-hand side of the engine bay. What we saw was a 13B running two Garrett T04 turbos at 20 psi through a 4-speed Jericho gearbox. Current horsepower, 603, without nitrous.
It actually makes more horsepower than any other 13B rotary in the world. It's something we're fairly proud of.
Everything's managed by a Microtech MT12 computer with direct-fire coil pack ignition and methanol fueling. As a Microtech distributor, Maztec develops many systems on this car which make their way onto customers' cars. Other than the turbos themselves, every induction component was custom fabricated by Maztec, and they're the bits we can't show, but take it from us, they're very impressive. In fact, the Maztec workshop was crammed full of impressive rotaries, particularly this 20B 323 project car, which was unveiled just for us. It'll be raced in the near future and will eventually rival the RX3. But back at Calder Park, it's time to race. An earlier run had resulted in a disappointing 9.7 seconds. The wastegate had blown off when this $10 clamp came loose. The second run improved to 9.55 at 138, but surprisingly, the same clamp blew the wastegate off again. The third run, this time with a brand new clamp, was 9.55 again. The clamp stayed on, but Anthony made a mistake on launch which cost him a few tenths.
The mile an hour's up a little bit, but still 6 or 7 away from where we should be.
The next run was the first qualifier, so it's a dial-in time. That means instead of going as fast as possible, you must nominate a time and not go any faster, thereby rewarding consistency. Now feeling a bit dejected by the earlier problems, Anthony dialed in a cautious 9.50. Unfortunately, this was the run where the car decided to get up and fly. By the time Anthony realised and slowed, it was too late. He ran a 9.46, too quick for the dial-in. That's called a breakout and means Maztec's out of the event. Also at Calder Park that weekend, we found Grant Williams. A plumber by trade, Grant owns and races the ex-Cannon and Strong Series 4 RX7. Although there's some rivalry between Grant and Anthony, they actually race in different categories. Grant in Super Stock and Anthony in Super Sedan. Super Sedan's more flexible but carries only $600 prize money. Grant in Super Stock could pick up $2,200 for a win here today. He's also the only Rotary amongst an epidemic of V8s. His car's a tribute to low tech. Even he refers to the setup as prehistoric, but it all works surprisingly well. The 13B Extend port runs a single Garrett turbo at 30 psi with no intercooler via a single Weber carby. Sounds basic, but it produces 520 horsepower without nitrous to run a best time of 9.13. He once ran it with nitrous and hit 8.7 seconds to become Australia's fastest Rotary. But keep in mind the RX7 is nearly 500 pounds lighter than the Maztec RX3. Grant also had mixed results at this event. He began with a turbo problem and ran a 9.7, then followed with a respectable 9.29. But his third run was a sensation. .914, only 1/100th of a second off his previous best. He was now running fourth in the class.
Yeah, that was good. Very happy with that actually. In the heat, that was great.
However, he struck trouble in the final when the car refused to start. He too was out of the event. But all was not lost. Grant got to look under the bonnet of Anthony's RX3, something he'd never been allowed to do before. Of course, Sydney has no shortage of fast Rotaries either, with those of Rocky and George of Pack Performance probably the most known.
Rotaries are our specialty. We eat Rotaries, breathe Rotaries, live Rotaries.
But there is a bit of competition with Melbourne.
Anthony and Maztec, they do have the advantage of racing at Calder Park. Calder Park is probably Australia's fastest and quickest track. They only have to run a pipe off their exhaust, whereas we have to run a full street exhaust. So at the moment, with the way things are at Eastern Creek, I don't think our times are going to be anything to compare with Anthony's. We will be travelling down to Melbourne to race.
With a best time of 9.4, the 503 brake horsepower 20B Pac-Man has been popular for some time, and their 13B RX2 is now back on the track.
So now we have one car which we race as a 13B and one we race as a 20B, and that way we keep developing both engines at a similar rate rather than just put all our eggs in the one basket. The 13B probably is cheaper to get the run, although with a 13B you have to probably push the engine a lot harder, so it's under a lot more stress than a 20B. With the extra cubes of the 20B you can afford to run the engine probably less stress than you would a 13B and get the same power. The 20B's got a lot of torque, it's good for burnouts, it just pulls all up the track. It doesn't sound like a Rotary, so you don't get all the people hassling you about the rotary noise. 20B is nice, yeah. I prefer the 20B. The RX3 at the moment is just having some work done on it. Well, RX2, this is our main weapon at the moment at Pack Performance. It used to be the original car that we raced for a very long time. I think probably put our name on the map, and it's been in hiding for a while, but we've just got it up and running again, and we hope to be running in mid to low nines with this very soon.
The 13B block is from a Series 6 RX-7. Everything else is custom made. The single Garrett T04 runs 14 psi through a Jericho 4-speed box and a Ford 9-inch diff. The exhaust is 3.5 inches. Injection and other electronics are handled by a Microtech MT12. Total output 460 horsepower at the wheels. Rocky and George arrived at our shoot with a group of customers from a recent Fast Fours and Rotaries cover story. They all put on a little display for the cameras. There was Tom Muhammad and his 13B 808 with 330 horsepower at the wheels. Mehmet Hursley brought his rare Series 4 RX2. Jason Flavin's RX3 was top rotary at the Summernats Horsepower Heroes Shootout. And a P-plater tried to take out our cameraman. Mehmet and Jason wanted the first drag. Jason won with a 13 flat. Tom was already warming up his tyres, so he showed him a 1000cc Honda Firestorm and waved them off. The bike ran exactly 12 seconds, Tom at 12.1. A week later, Tom ran a 10.9 at 127 miles per hour at an Eastern Creek street meet. Meanwhile, Jason took on a Kawasaki ZX6R. Despite the bike losing traction, it still won with a 12 flat to Jason's 12.5. Time for Rocky to teach the bikes a lesson. On the first attempt, the beast was wound up too high at 16 pounds, affecting the car's stability.
Well, at the track I was on and off the throttle, you know. It was very snaky, but you probably got to see that anyway. Yeah.
Now running 14 pounds, Rocky tried again. This time against the Kawasaki ZX7R. Victory at last, 10.9 for Rocky, 12 seconds again for the bike. With further development, the RX2's times are sure to improve.
We hope to be running in the mid to low nines with this very soon, provided we have a decent track to race on.
The one engine transplant not mentioned in our Datsun 1600 feature in the previous video was the SR20 Turbo. And they don't get any better than this example. Audio engineer Jeff Shoesmith spent 2.5 years building this car, and it shows. We've never seen such meticulous quality control and attention to detail. Details like incorporating tweeters in the air vents, for example. Many new cars aren't as well put together.
The 1600's a great car. It's always been my favourite car as far as I can remember.
Jeff built it as he'd expect Nissan to build it if they ever reintroduced the 1600 as a high-performance sports sedan.
I did a lot of the work here on the car myself. Everything except the paint and the trim. Suspension and some of the fancy work underneath was done by other people, but the fitting of the engine, making the engine mounts, the wiring of the computer and all of the intake plumbing, stereo work, the actual fitting of seats and making different bits and pieces of brakes fit together. I did all of that.
It's a quality package that's not too extreme in any one area other than performance. And there's no shortage of performance. Standard in the Australian 200SX, the SR20 DET 16-valve twin-cam intercooled turbo is Nissan's flagship four-cylinder. In standard form, it's good for 200 horsepower. In a car weighing less than 1,000 kilos, the power-to-weight ratio is better than a WRX. The Garrett T28 is set at 14 psi with sequential fuel injection via the factory computer. Although a little more expensive than an FJ20, the SR20 is now becoming more common as a conversion choice. So to see how it compares, Peter Papacinas brought along his orange FJ20. Peter finished this car about 2 years ago. Its standard turbo runs 10 psi through a Microtech D5 computer. There's no intercooler, but it is air conditioned. After blowing up a couple of previous engines, the car's cost him about 25 grand so far. Fast 4's editor, Dean Evans, took it for a spin but found the locker diff provides a very quick transition from understeer to oversteer. So we put the 1600s together on the drag strip. Over two almost identical runs, the G-Techs recorded a best of 14.6 for the SR and 14.75 for the FJ, both at 102 miles per hour. At a recent street meet, Jeff got that figure down to 13.8. At the same meeting, Stephen Fisher's SR20 managed a 13.1 at 104 miles per hour, but he runs a front-mounted intercooler rather than Jeff's top mount. Carlos Zambrana also chose the SR20 for his Bluebird TRX. It took 6 months for BD4s to build using the standard computer, huge custom intercooler and various HKS products. Most significant is the HKS EVC2 electronic boost controller. Carlos usually runs the turbo at 11 psi, but presets another 6 pounds available through the optional trigger on the gear stick. When activated, the extra 6 pounds translates to another 50 horsepower, a total of 260. As this car's mainly developed for drag racing, it uses a welded diff, great for the drag strip, but not much help in corners, where it provokes terminal understeer. No matter how hard Carlos tried, it wouldn't turn in at speed. Mind you, his braking technique could use some refinement. But racing Jeff's 1600, it was a different story. Despite being a heavier car, with the extra boost and front-mounted intercooler, Carlos won with a 14.2 at 103. Carlos has run a 13.6 in the past. Probably the most unique SR20 conversion is John Wilmington's 3 Series BMW. We first met John at an Eastern Creek street meet, removing the headlights to let more air into the intercooler. Converting the BMW wasn't as difficult as it might first appear. The SR20 and gearbox slotted in fairly easily. No cutting was needed. The engine even fitted the original BMW crossmember. He added Toyota Supra engine mounts, a 5 Series LSD, custom tail shaft, custom intercooler and a Commodore clutch. And the interior was freshened up with a complete refit from Roman Autotech. On the drag strip, a rear CV joint exploded at the start of his second run, so he didn't spend too much time on the track.
Better next time.
But on our shoot day, to get him back in the mood, we let him drag Carlos's TRX. The G-Tech showed another 14.2 for Carlos, 14.6 for John. Possibly the most tuned version of the SR20 engine was fitted to Dean's own car, the Pulsar GTI-R.
But his run of success ended on SS15 when the engine made a loud noise and burst.
Developed in 1990, Nissan produced the GTI-R to compete in selected rounds of the 91 and 92 World Rally Championships. It finished third in its debut event and won the 92 Group N World Championship. Apart from being full-time four-wheel drive, it's 50 kilos lighter than a WRX and able to run 13.9 seconds in standard trim. Nissan quotes 230 horsepower, or around 170 kilowatts, 15 more than a WRX engine. Compared to the current 200SX engine, the GTIR has a better flowing cylinder head, a larger T28 turbo running 9 psi boost, quad throttle body induction and a massive air-to-air intercooler. At the 1997 Nationals, after a shaky start, it placed second outright in the Go to Woe. Dean has since fitted intake and exhaust mods, turned up the boost to 16 psi and run a 13.2 at 102 miles per hour. So with 4 very similar engines, we put them all on the drag strip together. Four-wheel drive can be a distinct advantage. The initial jump of four-wheel traction gets it about 2 car lengths off the line. Dean scored a 14 flat at 103 miles per hour. The 1600 next, BMW third. You may be wondering what happened to the Bluebird.
All the synchros in the gearbox just went to pieces. I could hear it. I couldn't get into gear. It's just all crunching, so just had to stop and roll it back in.
We considered another drag with the 3 cars remaining, but noticed the BMW parked next to the track with John in a familiar position.
I broke another SCV.
So we called it a day. The GTIR was the quickest, but with the four-wheel drive advantage, that's expected. The other 3 showed the performance readily available from this engine for a quite reasonable conversion cost.
I've got out of this for probably $16,000–17,000, which is a Hyundai XL with a set of wheels, and that's the sort of comparison I draw. I know what I'd rather have.
You may remember this car from last year's Nationals. Despite its innocent appearance, the 93 Lancer GSR of Conker Kidos can travel from 0 to 100 kilometres an hour in just 3 seconds. You see, Con knows a lot about fast machinery. He's an avionics engineer with Qantas and a partner with brother John in Buckley Street Autotech. With its standard wheels, the Lancer looks discreet from the outside, but the action's all under the bonnet. Still a 1.8 litre, the performance arrives courtesy of forged pistons, high-flowed leaded Cordia turbo, 2 extra injectors, although only one's being used at the moment, a custom intercooler, 3-inch exhaust and a compression ratio of just 8.1 to 1.
These mods that I've got done to it now, you can run it up to 18 pounds on just premium unleaded. I tend to lean towards an aviation gasoline in racing tune form, which is around 22 pounds.
An extra fuel pump and injector cut in automatically at 14 pounds, injecting straight octane booster direct from this bottle. But the trickiest modification was replacing the standard computer with a Haltech system. Con's still developing parts of it, like the special anti-lag control under the dash, which builds boost at idle.
It's got good drivability, no big cams required. The turbo gives it power when it's required.
On a 4-wheel dyno, the Lancer now produces 240 horsepower at the wheels, over 360 at the flywheel. They can do this to your GSR or your WRX for about $15,000. To demonstrate the Lancer's drag strip performance, we found a turbo 4-wheel drive that Con hadn't run against. A current model Nissan GTR V-Spec, one of Japan's fastest production cars. The Nissan never stood a chance. The G-Tech gave Con a best time of 12 seconds flat at 117 miles per hour on standard tyres, very close to his previous best of 11.7. The GTR was still quick at 13.6, but it wasn't enough. Meanwhile, back at Buckley Street, Con's car attracts its share of clones. This customer's Lancer differs by 1 digit on the licence plate. And out the back, we found a familiar car, Jeff Newton's Escort from the last video.
Jeff.
Barry, it's not ready. Sorry, go away.
Now with a Group A Cosworth twin cam head and a few other interesting mods. More about this in the next video.
Sorry, mate.
For the sake of domestic harmony, it could be time to sell the Lancer.
You you know what women do to you, so it's got to go. I am willing to sell it right now if anyone offers me the nominal fee that I'm after.
The nominal fee is around 35 grand, which seems good value considering Mitsubishi's own alternative. The first Evolution 5 in the country arrived with just 8 kilometres on the clock. Dean Evans scored the first drive.
First thing you notice is how quickly the thing comes on boost and how it develops the boost. You put your foot down, it really pulls strongly. It pulls down the corners hard, you can feel the forward drive working. It's great on the brakes as well.
The previous Evo 4 won the 97 World Rally Drivers' Championship in the hands of Tommy Mäkinen, but this example was imported by Rally Art for GTP racing. Owned and driven by Ross Armand, it came overall 6th in Class A in its first outing at Calder Park in April. Capable of 12.9 second quarters in standard trim, the Evo 5 engine is a 276 horsepower 2-litre twin-cam single turbo running 13 pounds of boost and secondary air injection. You'll also notice an adjustable aluminium rear wing, huge Brembo brakes, intercooler water sprays and a strange side entry muffler. But if you don't have around 70 grand put aside for an Evo 5, Rally Art may still be able to help. If you like glowing orange paint, you'll love the Project Lancer built by Rally Art and Roman Autotech, which debuted at the 97 Sydney International Motor Show. Based on the MR Coupe, it's designed for maximum visual impact. The exterior is dominated by the Evo 4 wing and body kit and striking 16-inch Momo arrows. Inside, European carbon fibre worth 2.5 grand complements the Roman Autotech custom-designed interior. The integrated concept teams matching door trims and rear seats with beefed-up support to the impressive front Recaros featuring air pump lumbar adjustment. The matching gear knob and Momo steering wheel finish it off nicely. The suspension's heavily revised and lowered 2 inches. The bigger exhaust and Haltech computer improve throttle response, but you'll be noticed no matter what speed you're doing. Subaru's Impreza WRX STI version 3 Type R 2-door is not only the longest titled, but the fastest production Subaru to reach Australia. Imported as an evaluation vehicle, we had only limited time to drive it around Subaru's car park, so any real performance testing wasn't possible. Still, if you're planning on going flat out around a car park for half an hour, this is the car to do it. Based on the 97 model, the heart of the STI 3 is a tuned version of the familiar WRX flat 4 engine. With forged pistons and a lower compression ratio of 8:1, the increase in turbo boost to about 17 psi brings output up to the Japanese maximum of 206 kilowatts. That's a power to weight ratio 30% better than a standard WRX. We'd expect it to run a quarter mile in 13.1 and 0 to 100 k's in 5 seconds flat. Very handy in a suburban car park. Subaru set a world record in badge display on this car. We counted 14 STI markings. Inside there are many interesting bits, like the thumb wheel for distributing drive through the centre diff. The 6 lights on the dash show the stages of adjustment, from 50-50 split to 65% rear-wheel drive. Also on the dash are the water spray switches for the 2 nozzles above the larger intercooler. There's also a short shifter, emergency flare, climate-controlled, door nets and a rear wiper. An impressive machine for the expected price of 60 grand if it's ever sold here. But to compare it to a WRX that's actually used in a rally, we visited the workshop of ARC team Miles Sandy and Michelle Murphy. Capable of 400 horsepower from its STI turbo engine via a Motec M8 computer, this WRX has a few extra features. The intercooler water spray is automatically varied by throttle position and boost pressure. There's a separate cooling system for the power steering fluid, custom-made avgas fuel tank in the boot, AP racing discs with bias adjustment on the dash, 60mm height adjustable shocks, door-mounted navigator's instrument panel, passenger foot brace, roof vents, more switches in the centre console than the radio ever had, a genuine carbon fibre lightweight dash, and enough carbon fibre left over to form the bell-mouth air intake. The exhaust began as a 3-inch but received some creative panel beating in competition. But competition's one thing, cruising's another. We last saw Bashir Osman in the previous video with his yellow twin-turbo WRX. Since then, he's built a few more for the rest of the family, all in different colours.
This is the white one, the yellow one, that's a green one, and that's the new project.
All very colourful on the subtle t-shirt. Sunkiss is quite interesting for reasons other than the soft drink bottles on the sunroof. With a new Garrett T04 needle roller bearing turbo running 20 psi, larger front-mounted intercooler and Motec computer, Bashir's claiming 320 horsepower. Like Sunkiss, Bashir's yellow car is no longer a twin-turbo. The sequential twins never really worked as well as they could have. Incorrect staging caused it to always bog down at low revs, so it's been dumped in favour of the single-turbo motor, running 18 psi via a Microtech Digi 2. With approximately 240 horsepower, he's expecting a 13-second quarter mile, but has yet to try a run with the new engine. Their white car is currently waiting for a new fluoro colour to be invented. Mods are similar to the yellow car, but with a larger intercooler in the factory top mount position. Then of course there's Fredo, owned by Bashir's brothers Ahir. Since its appearance on the January '98 cover of Fast Fours and Rotaries, it's seen a few changes. Despite signs to the contrary, Fredo is also no longer a twin-turbo.
No anymore, not twin-turbo.
It's now received forged pistons, an STI gearbox and turbo, the '98 model front end, 17-inch Evolution wheels and enough badges to cause a real STI owner to do a quick stock take. With boost of 18 psi, Zahir quotes output as 270 frog power. Inside there's seat trims you'd never find in a Recaro catalogue, elegant red and green dash panels and enough leather frogs to keep Miss Piggy very happy. The blue WRX wasn't actually an Osman car. It belongs to restaurant owner Tony Ray. We brought it along to see how well a WRX can be personalised without spending heaps. Tony started with a '97 club spec model in Pro Drive Blue, then added a $500 rear wing and a set of 17-inch wheels and tyres for about $3,000. Inside, carbon fibre trim and Razo pedals. Under the bonnet, a K&N filter, $400 Blitz blow-off valve and an $800 2.5-inch exhaust system. And the WRX's natural tendency to power understeer was solved with $2,000 worth of Coney struts, springs and sway bars. His total spend around $7,000. With only minor engine mods, we figured it might be interesting to check it on the drag strip. Bashir nominated his white car. Remember, this car runs an aftermarket computer, 18 psi boost against Tony's standard 12, a bigger intercooler and a 3-inch exhaust. With half a second between them, we tried again. The white car's best run was 13.9, Tony a 14 flat, with a 5.8 second 0 to 100. You find a lot of WRXs at street meet drags nowadays. This one disguised his number plate, hoping not to void his new car warranty. And this is Fast Fours testing a standard press car. Running 14.2s, the WRX is a favourite amongst thieves, enthusiasts and magazine editors. The most popular car in our first video was Lance Warren's 20B powered HB Cosmo. Lance actually came along this time to show us the neat new front end, but once he hit the burnout strip, he was unstoppable. It was our first real look at his other car, the 20B Unos JC Cosmo he brought over from New Zealand. Now out of production, the JC was the first and only production Mazda sold with a 3-rotor 20B engine. Twin sequential turbos generated a rumoured 300 horsepower and a huge 402 newton metres of torque, plenty of power to easily push 1,600 kilos around. The JC Cosmo sold from 1990 to 96, only in Japan and only as an automatic. Lance's is the top spec model, known as the Type E CCS, and the interior is quite an eye-opener. It's dominated by a touchscreen monitor which controls the stereo system, ventilation, telephone, and TV. It also incorporates a global positioning satellite system to tell you how far from Tokyo you are. Both front seats are electric and the steering wheel contains more buttons for cruise control, stereo and ventilation. And when the key is removed, the steering wheel tilts away from your beer gut for an easy exit. After our Eastern Creek shoot, Lance's new $10,000 20-inch wheels arrived from JC Racing in Queensland. They only just fitted. The P0s cost $1,200 a piece for a very thin strip of rubber. But they looked great. By lifting the guards and adding heaps of negative camber, lowering should be possible.
When the suspension work's finished, the way it's going to look is this guard here, it's going to be right down over this part of the rim here, so that's how low it's going to be.
Unfortunately, the lipping started early when one wheel caught on a guard. If you've got a set of 20-inch wheels waiting around for the right car, the JC Cosmo is now available in Australia. These examples are all 20Bs, but a version with a twin-turbo 13B similar to the Series 6 RX-7 is also available. This one's the 20B Type E. No TV screen inside, but still the same leather and other toys. And this is the lower spec Type S for sports. The leather's gone, but it's lighter and the suspension's firmer, so it's more at home on the track. Even with its weight and the standard auto, it'll still run a quarter mile in 14.2 seconds and 0 to 100k in 5.9. Prices start from around $40,000 for the 13B to over $70,000 for the Type E CCS 20B. Now also available are the older HB Cosmo and HC Luce, Mazda's rotary flagships of the 80s. With its factory 12A turbo pumping out 165 horsepower, the HB was at one stage Japan's fastest production car. The HC Luce included some odd features like power rear seats, a negative iron generator and a minibar fridge. All model Cosmos and Luces are available from DMRH Special Vehicles in Sydney. Mark 1 in Queensland can also provide the JC Cosmo. Redline Rotary in Sydney is the parts and service centre. Australian dealers are now importing a limited number of Japanese used cars, models that were never sold in Australia. Usually at least 2 years old and with fairly low mileage, they're a great way to get into a unique, high-tech, high-performance machine at a very reasonable price. To test some of these cars, we asked along precision driver Rod Turnbull. Rod's been rallying for over 10 years and has won 5 New South Wales championships and an Australian Rally Championship in Class 1. Of course, we wouldn't ask him to try anything that he wouldn't do in his own car. Probably the best known Japanese supercar is the legendary Nissan GTR. Twice Bathurst winner and known locally as Godzilla, exactly 100 of these R32 models were specially compliant by Nissan Australia back in 1992 and sold for $110,000.
Very slippery out there. The car was getting a lot of initial understeer, which then turned to quite violent oversteer, but with the four-wheel drive system, once it came in, it did right itself.
If you can find an Australian GTR, you'll pay about $65,000 to $75,000, or try a virtually identical Japanese one for between $50,000 and $65,000. You can tell this slightly muddy one is not Australian spec by the colour. They came in black, silver and burgundy only. Otherwise, it's the same 2.6-litre, 6-cylinder, twin-turbo, four-wheel drive, four-wheel steer beast, producing 206 kilowatts or 276 horsepower. This GTR's owner, Russ Jones, was a bit unlucky during our shoot.
They tell me there was a cloud of black smoke came out at the end of the straight, and I think I must have done a piston.
Severe detonation cracked 2 pistons, causing Russ the embarrassment of a tow truck ride home.
I hope it's not too expensive. Typically when you're dealing with these cars, they are. But Mr. Bartlett will do his work on it, no doubt.
4 weeks later, Kevin Bartlett's bill for 6 new pistons came to $4,000. This version was never seen in Australia and is far more affordable. It's the Skyline GTS 4 Coupe. With a 2-litre 6-cylinder single turbo producing 160 kilowatts or 215 horsepower, it's still a pretty quick machine and sells for about $28,000. They still have the sophisticated four-wheel drive system, but if you prefer rear-wheel drive, look for a GTS-T, 160 kilos lighter. Performance is slightly improved. Externally, the GTS models are not as brutal looking without the GTR's bulging flared guards and wider grille. But overall, a good value performance car capable of 7 seconds 0 to 100s. In late '93, Nissan began upgrading the Skylines to the R33 series. With a smoother, some would say blander exterior, they do look more modern. But the GTR will still cost serious money, particularly the sensational 300 horsepower V-Spec version, from $85,000 to well over $100,000. But Rod seemed to like it.
Truly sensational car. Of all the cars we've driven today, this is by far and away the best. The performance is staggering. It's pulling in excess of 100 mile an hour down the straight in third gear. You grab fourth, then fifth, and just keeps accelerating off the dial until it hits a speed limit of about 190, 200 k's. Handling is so predictable, so impressive. This car just slides around corners. It's got computer controlled traction that's making it just pull itself out of corners with a minimum driver effort.
Again, the lesser versions are the better value in Australia. Particularly this rear-wheel drive GTS 25T. With a 2.5 litre single turbo producing 187 kilowatts or 251 horsepower, it's capable of 0 to 100k times in the low sixes, all for around 40 to 45 grand. By the way, all domestic Japanese cars are speed limited to 180 kilometres per hour and carry a corresponding speedo. On this GTS, it's replaced by a 300k Blitz unit. Want something a little smaller and lighter? Try the Nissan 180SX. This pre-91 version is powered by the CA18 turbo, but after 91 you'll find a high-output SR20 turbo similar to the Australian 200SX. Rear-wheel drive, hatchback convenience, and at 120 kilos less than the 200SX, it really flies. Expect 0 to 100 in low 6 seconds. At about $25,000, it's a true bargain fast four. And on wet roads, hang on tight. At the other end of the Nissan range, there's the twin-turbo 300ZX. In Australia, we only saw the 3-litre non-turbo V6. Add a couple of turbos, four-wheel steering and a huge selection of performance parts available from the US and Japan, and you've got a very quick car with plenty of potential. It's a heavy car, but 300 horsepower on tap makes it a great long-distance tourer.
It handles very nicely if you balance it. But as I found out in a couple of laps out there, as soon as you get on the gas, she just wants to spin. A slippery day like this, you've got to be very gentle with it.
It'll run from 0 to 100 in 6 seconds and set you back between $35,000 and $55,000. If you don't like automatics, start searching now. Only 5% were produced as manuals. At around the same weight, but with a 6-speed gearbox, sequential turbos and traction control, you'll find the dramatic-looking 3-litre Supra twin turbo. This one's owned by Brian El Hassan, the CRX owner from the last video.
All I've done on it, put a HKS exhaust system on it, heavy duty suspension, 18-inch zip-tables from Racing Motion and Aussie tyres, and I've done the paint job myself.
And of course there's Brian's trademark yellow leather interior. Capable of under 6 seconds 0 to 100 times in timber panelled luxury, the Supra is a quick prestige sports car from $60,000 to $80,000. Every time we parked this Mitsubishi FTO for filming, we were immediately surrounded by people asking what it was. Not really surprising considering its unique styling. The rear even has elements of Porsche 928 about it. The FTO is also unique in that it's front-wheel drive, although to drive it you'd never know. It's perfectly balanced, heaps of fun with no apparent torque steer. Its showpiece is the 2-litre V6 MiVec engine, Mitsubishi's answer to Honda's VTEC. Naturally aspirated, it revs to an 8,000 RPM redline and produces a surprising 150 kilowatts or 201 horsepower. If you're looking to spend $35,000 to $40,000 and don't mind attracting a crowd, the FTO is worth a look. Most of of these cars were supplied by Unique Autosports in Castle Hill and Edward Lee's in Concord. If you're considering buying a low-volume import, check with a specialist dealer and do some research. Ask about parts supply, insurance, compliance, ADR certification and a Japanese deregistration certificate. This seriously modified MR2 Turbo, owned and built by Sydney's BD4s, is not exactly new to the Australian scene, but it's been so extensively developed and redeveloped over a 6-year period, we thought it deserved to be checked out. So we gave Rod the keys and told him to drive it hard.
What a crazy little car this is. This MR2 has incredible performance. It's got a huge turbo on it, so it comes on boost with a real rush and sits you back in the seat. You get on the power out of a corner and you feel like it's going to do a donut on you. It's quite exhilarating to drive.
When we visited BD4s, part owner Paul Brell gave us the latest details on the 285 horsepower machine. The original engine had been replaced by a 2-litre turbo unit from the newest GT4, which bolted straight in. Its turbo has just been replaced by a larger HKS GT30 turbo running up to 20 psi and an external wastegate. Hidden behind the enlarged body side air scoop is the big intercooler. For increased airflow, 2 fans were added to the louvered engine cover. At about 10 psi, water is injected here into the air intake as well as onto the intercooler. In the boot, Paul showed us the 2 reservoir bottles for the water injection systems, the audio amps, the external surge tank and heavy-duty fuel filter and fuel pump. Inside the car, don't try squeezing a street directory in the glove box. It's already filled with gauges and a convenient slot for speeding tickets. There's boost pressure, fuel pressure and an HKS adjustable boost controller currently preset to 14 and 20 psi. The higher figure is activated by the trigger button on the gear knob. Below that is the traction control switch with on-off light further up the dash. The system's driven by the engine's Motec computer via the ABS system. Need more gauges? Try air temperature out of the turbo, exhaust temperature and inlet manifold temperature. Next to the tacho is the shift light set at 6,500 RPM. The HKS needle roller bearing turbo is so efficient that when the engine shuts off, it takes 35 seconds before it stops spinning. The single stainless steel exhaust branches off into a dual HKS system with twin mufflers. For comparison, this MR2 is the GT version, which never reached Australia. It uses the 3S GTE engine and single turbo to produce 225 horsepower. As a low volume import, you can now buy one for about 30 to 40 grand. You even get a boost gauge with no numbers on it. But before we could set up a drag between the 2 MR2s, this Skyline GTS jumped the queue. The Nissan 2.5 litre turbo might give the MR2 a real challenge. It did for a few seconds, then the MR2 hit second gear and took off. That noise you heard as the MR2 crossed the line wasn't the blow-off valve, more like the blow-off stone guard. It had dropped too low, scraped the road and got stuck. And when it comes to ripping large plastic bits off an expensive car, everyone wants to help. So with the red GT waiting patiently, we set up the next drag. Again, the BD4's car bogged down off the line, but the GT couldn't relax. Second gear and it's off again. The results? 13.2 for the BD4's car, 14 for the GT and high 14s for the GTS. This car shows what Toyota could have done with the Japanese GT. Even if you're not into Rotaries, the first generation RX-7s are the only modern rear-wheel drive sports cars you'll find for under $10,000. But when 16-year-old Robin first saw this 85 Series 3, it looked nothing like this. Its previous owner had argued with a barbed wire fence and lost. The original 12A engine had done 170,000 kilometres, but it compression tested fine and wasn't blowing smoke. For $3,000, it seemed like a good proposition, despite some panels being beyond repair. Robin wanted it done up properly, but was on a very limited budget. The first stop, Sydney's Jap Performance, specialists in performance parts and panels imported from Japan and the US. They arrive in container loads along with entire front cuts. For now, Robin only wanted panels, and there were stacks of them. Blemish panels are cheaper, but they'll take longer to panel beat. And American RX-7 bumpers are $100 cheaper than Australian or Japanese ones because they're heavier. They contain shock absorbers to suit US low-speed impact laws. The most complex panel to replace was the rear quarter, as it's welded to form part of the roof. Jap Performance had already stripped this damaged Australian RX-7, but the rear was in good condition. So they got the oxy torch out and cut off the entire quarter as if it was a barbecue chicken. It's cheaper than buying just the panel, but at some stage each of the spot welds holding the panel to the frame will have to be unpicked, a fairly tedious job. With the van loaded with everything needed, the shopping list came to $1,075. Next stop, Wyoming Smash Repairs in Gosford. Robin could have attempted a repair and spray in a mate's garage, but he wanted the job done professionally. Wyoming have a reputation for not using bog in their repairs. Panels are beaten, filed and sanded in the old-fashioned way for a better result. After filing back the replacement panels, you see what condition they're really in. They discovered this bullet hole in the American front quarter panel. Replacing the rear quarter was quite a chore. After the old one was removed, they found the inner wheel arch was also unrepairable. Fortunately, buying an entire quarter meant they had a spare one of these as well. It was cut to fit and used as a template to cut off the old one, then welded on for an exact fit. The new panel was then clamped into position. The joint in the B pillar is crucial, as it's a very visible part of the car. By cutting through both panels together, the joint should match up precisely no matter how unsteady you are with the saw. A week later, you'd never pick the joint. To save money, Robin had the car painted the original silver colour. That avoids the expense of removing the engine and spraying inside the engine bay and door jambs. But the original silver was a very flat colour, so Wyoming suggested adding aluminium flake. It gives it a brighter look, but doesn't oxidise as quickly as regular metallic. The American front bumper was disappointing. Someone had sprayed it with cans of black enamel which couldn't be removed, another trap when buying second-hand panels. But overall, a quality repair and respray for under $5,000. The interior was already in good condition, the Momo wheel, CD player and door locks the only improvements needed. Next, Robin looked for a few extra horsepower. There was very little money left and it looked like the 12A would last a while longer, so increased efficiency was the aim. Next stop, Rickshaw Performance. Having modified and raced RX-7s for many years, there's not much Rick doesn't know about them. His suggestion was to begin with a bigger exhaust. Modifications to a Rotaries exhaust system will lead to greater gains in power than equivalent mods to a piston engine. So to gain power and retain drivability without too much noise, Rick opted for a 2¼ inch exhaust and a set of extractors. He also added the correct Magna Core leads for this setup. Total cost $700. The dyno showed an increase of 15 horsepower, mainly at the top end. But even with the new exhaust, it was still making less power than expected. The comment at the bottom of the invoice told the full story. 7 weeks later, it expired in a cloud of white smoke. Although out of money, Robin had to consider the options for a replacement engine. Time for another visit to Jap Performance. There's a huge range of performance engines here, not just Rotaries. So when Robin's parents offered to buy the engine, as long as it wasn't a turbo, the choice began to narrow. He settled on a 13B EFI 6-port from a Series 4 RX-7, for which Mazda claims 146 horsepower. With a smaller counterweight to suit a light and flywheel, the cost was $1,150 with a 30-day warranty. You don't have to run this engine with fuel injection. With Robin's budget in mind, Rickshaw refitted the original 4-barrel carby with an adapter plate and a change to mechanical secondaries. The difference on the road was striking. On the dyno, peak power increased by a further 22%, mid-range by 55%, and torque increased noticeably by about 50%. The cost, including labour, lightened flywheel and a new heavy-duty clutch, $750. With further changes to intake and exhaust, there's potential for plenty more power. Rick's workshop contained a few other examples. This convertible also had its original 12A when its current owner Simon bought it. But instead of a transplant, Rick rebuilt the 12A into a 13B. He also mild ported it, added extractors, a bigger exhaust and EMS fuel injection. For $8,000, Simon ended up with 145 horsepower at the wheels. Rod tried both cars at Eastern Creek.
It's a nice little car. It's quite a little package for the cost of it so far.
But he wasn't keen on the mechanical secondaries.
When you try to accelerate out of a corner and it hits a dead spot and then kicks really hard. Outbraked myself a little bit there. What happens, went back to second gear, let the clutch out, and it locked the rears. It was hard under brakes. It's a classic example of being a little bit too violent and just braking a little bit late. But I'll be interested to see how Robin feels behind the wheel, and we'll go and have a look at what he's got to do.
More concentration was needed.
Okay, and accelerate gently away.
Having never driven on a racetrack before, there was a lot to think about.
And she beat you. See, as soon as it flicks back, you've got to be ready to catch that situation, because they can bite you very hard and very fast.
So Rod showed him the correct line through the corner. Next up was Simon's car.
Well, it's quite a difference between this car and the silver RX-7. First thing I noticed is that the power is much smoother, and the car wants to rev very hard. It's excellent. It's got fuel injections, had a lot more money spent on it than the other one. But its handling needs a lot of attention. It's quite high, and if you have a look down here, it's probably 2 or 3 centimetres too high in the rear, and the suspension's quite soft. When you get on the power out of a corner, it initially understeers and then gets what I call roll oversteer, and the car wants to snap the tail out. And when you get it into a power slide, you can't quite hold that slide, and then as you catch it, it flicks you back the other way, and as you'll see from the other camera shot, flicks me off the road and into the dirt.
You'd think he'd know what to expect by now. But RX-7s do make good circuit races. The yellow car's owner, Peter, has twice run second in Club Car State Championships in an RX-3. He's now moved on to this Series 1 RX-7. Running a 13B Bridgeport and EMS injection, it'll deliver over 200 horsepower at the wheels. Also racing with Peter at Amaroo is Rick Shaw in his own RX-7, powered by a 20B engine producing over 300 horsepower at the wheels. But for Robin's car, next time we'll check out different EFI computers, upgrading the wheels and tyres, the pros and cons of going turbo, changing diff ratios and some basic handling improvements.
Nicely caught. Well, almost caught.
Get your finger off the fast forward button. This GTI is Australia's fastest front wheel drive. Try 12.2 seconds at 117 miles per hour. It belongs to Mario Raperti.
This is the goal that I achieved, to become the fastest front wheel drive in Australia. Currently anyway. I got Croydon to do all the work for me, and they did a great job.
They took the Suzuki engine and added forged pistons, Carrillo rods, shot peen crank, stainless steel valves, Motec M4 computer and a Garrett T28 turbo. With a 6.9 to 1 compression ratio and drinking avgas, it'll run 27 pounds of boost. and that results in 235 horsepower at the front wheels.
Just having all that power to the front wheels, the way it sort of torques these and things like that, it's just a bit of a rush on trying to get a handle on everything.
To help traction, there's a Suzuki LSD and raised and stiffened rear suspension. Underinflating the front slicks also helps, but it leaves a strange-looking skid mark.
It's my first mod that I've ever done. I had the car for 5 years, I didn't do anything to it, then all of a sudden I just got the horsepower bug.
Hoping to beat his own record, we found Mario at a recent street meet.
I'm hoping, if everything goes all right, a high 11. Oh yeah, I enjoy it. It's great. I think it's that rush that you get, you know. It's like lining up, staging up, and then all of a sudden just sort of taking off.
The GT Falcon wasn't much of a challenge.
I ended up doing a 12.5, 117 mile an hour. The mile an hour is good. Just my 60-foot time, I got too much wheel spin. If I can get it to hook up, that's the key thing. If I can get it to hook up, get the numbers anyway.
And the grubby Gemini was just on its way to the car wash.
The second run was better. I got the 60-foot time down. I did a 1.9 60-footer and ended up doing a 12.3.
But unfortunately, the 12.3 was his best for the night. Back at our shoot, the owner of this RX-7 thought a big burnout would score him a drag with Mario. And it did. But he couldn't get close. And Mario's girlfriend's apparently impressed with his car too.
If she gets me, the Suzuki's part of the package. So the Suzuki ain't going anywhere.
Mazda's MX-5 is a neat little sports car, but it's always begged for more power.
A friend showed me one in '89, and I was a Rotary head, so I said, a Rotary's got to go in that, and it's only just this year that we've actually been able to achieve that dream.
So what do you achieve by sticking a rotary turbo under the bonnet? Well, you finally get the performance the car has always deserved. 320 horsepower is more than double that of the standard car.
I've just done 3 laps of Eastern Creek in this little car, and it is incredible. For just under 35,000 bucks, this car has immense power. It's got a Series 4 turbo engine and gearbox in it. It's just got the wheelbase slightly longer, the whole front end's redesigned, and it is just fantastic. It's brilliant balance. John here, who's designed and built it, has done an incredible job.
Built by John Bettini of Bullet Rotary in Tweed Heads, John began by chopping off the entire front end of his Jap import MX-5.
This is the main goodies. No longer a little 1.8, we've got a Series 4 turbo out of an RX-7. We felt that the motor was overpowered for the original chassis, so we've cleaned it back to the firewall, and from there we've built a full tubular chassis, as you can see. That actually extends completely under the car and ties in the rear cross member. That makes it extremely stiff, and you can put as much power as you want in there. It's not going to flex. We blended the RX-7 into the MX-5 to get the geometry perfect, and it's perfect. It works sensationally.
Headlights look familiar? They're from a Chrysler Neon. They combine with the bonnet and guards to become one piece of tilting fiberglass. It's not easy finding a worthwhile comparison for a car like this, but we thought a Lotus Elise might be interesting. Sure, it's a mid-engined 1.8 litre non-turbo, but at 675 kilograms, the power-to-weight ratio is very similar. Roughly half the power, half the weight, and twice the price.
You can float this car around, slide it wherever you want, point it, brake it. It just does everything the driver wants. It's a real driver's car. It's beautiful.
The Lotus has smooth, consistent power and handles and brakes beautifully. But the onboard cameras show how easily the Bullet Roadster could pull away from it. We figured dragging both cars would lead to an obvious Mazda victory, but it struck trouble. Unknown to us all, a hose from the turbo had somehow come adrift. so the engine was receiving no boost. To everyone's surprise, the Lotus won with a 14.7. By the time John's turbo problem was located, we'd run out of time.
It's running a bit doughy though. I think it might have done something to the engine a while back. It's not really running real hard.
On a slippery surface the next day, the G-Tech recorded a 14 flat at 109, and John has since run mid-13s with ease. This car's only the prototype, but John's already had plenty of orders for them at $35,000 for the complete kit. Engineer approved and ready for registration. Build time is about 8 weeks. And John's next project?
We're going to do the same thing to a Series 6 RX-7, hopefully fairly soon, but with a triple rotor.
We've got a supercharged twin cam Corolla, 1988 model. Let's see how she goes. Fast by the smell of things.
It may not look too flash with its standard wheels and skinny tyres, but Vince Bombadiero's Corolla shows what you can expect from a powerful motor in a front-wheel drive car on a wet surface.
Well, she's certainly got some speed in her. Once the tail goes, you've got to be very fast to catch her. Got a lot of understeer with all that grunt.
To counter that understeer in fast corners, Rod applies the handbrake, which pushes the back of the car around and helps steer it through the corner. The onboard camera shows the transition to oversteer. Don't try this at home.
The beautiful thing about this being supercharged is it's got no lag. The throttle control is very easy. Quite a tidy package, considering it's got fairly standard suspension. She's handling nicely. It's got competition brake pads, so it's stopping quite well here too. Yeah, nice little car.
The 1.6 litre 4A GZE is from a later model Corolla, the Japanese market Levin, and produces 200 horsepower. BD4's performed a major surgery. The only modification needed was to the right-hand engine mount. The supercharger generates up to 12 psi and still lives with the original gearbox and factory computer. You'll notice the extractors wrapped up in their woolen jammies, the heat shield for the intake and the air duct leading to below the front bumper. 3 vents in the bonnet achieve both cooling and heat extraction. Next on Vince's shopping list is an HKS twin charger system, which adds a turbo to the supercharger. More about that in the next video. To help put the car into perspective, we added the similar looking Corolla of David Alanak. It's powered by the twin-cam 4AGE 20-valve engine with variable valve timing and Microtech computer, supplying about 175 horsepower. Adding ballast to the rear is an award-winning 1,000-watt sound system, accounting for some of the $40,000 spent on this car so far. Racing front-wheel drive cars on a damp track is not the best way to get good time. In less than ideal conditions, the supercharged Corolla won by about half a second. The G-Tech registered 16 flat. At an Eastern Creek street meet a few weeks later, Vince tried again. This time the dry track allowed a time much closer to his best of 14.9 seconds at 90 miles per hour. If you're weighing up supercharged or 20 valve, forced induction proves hard to beat. Sydney's 1998 Small Car Sunday was a top event, attracting a record crowd of spectators and cars. Among the varied displays was this lavish MX-5 and a familiar face from the last video.
I'm back.
Yes, Peter sold his 1600 and returned with a rare 4-door pillarless Bluebird Triple S, complete with Japanese-voiced lights-on reminders. At the presentation, prizes went to a few other familiar faces and cars. Bashir picked up one for Fredo, Jeff Shoesmith took a couple of awards for his 1600, and quite a few went to Andrew Curry. Andrew's R100 wagon was one of the more interesting machines at the show. Andrew's the man behind those painted by Gas 250 signs you see on many cars. And you may know him from his previous car.
I had a Cortina with a triple rotor in it. It's actually the same motor that went in this car.
The Cortina's gone now, but the mild ported 20B remains, now fitted snugly into this ex-Mazda 1300 wagon. It hasn't yet been raced, but this car will be seriously quick, particularly when a Turbonetics turbo replaces the Garrett TO45 in the near future.
It's a hobby, something to do, it keeps me out of trouble.
The interior is immaculate, taking up much of the 8 months build time and considerable expense.
This thing here probably owes me between 50 to 60,000.
But Andrew had plans for using the car at his upcoming wedding.
I'm going to get driven to the church in it.
And if he changes his mind, the rear escape hatch should come in handy. A couple of weeks later, the big day arrived. While the car attracted its share of attention, the bridal party carried on regardless. When it was over, Andrew and new wife chose the reliability of the limo, while the best man and groomsmen removed the car that suddenly wouldn't start.
Stop that camera.
And if a car needs attention, even rented tuxedos won't get in the way.
There you go, mate.
But Andrew was quite relaxed about it.
It's a Rotary.
By the time it finally kicked over, we were reminded why Andrew's new wife chose other transport.
She won't get in the car with me. She doesn't like the way I drive.